You're listening to the Reflective Teacher Podcast, and this is episode number 16.
I'm Selena Woodward, and I'm an English and drama teacher, university lecturer, and with Edufolios.org, a big-time reflective practitioner. So how can reflective practice help you grow your teaching skills, fall in love with your profession all over again, and help you nail accreditation and teacher registration with less stress and less work? Well, this is the Reflective Teacher Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Reflective Teacher Podcast. A massive thank you, first of all, to all of you who took on the Reflectionist Challenge from last week in episode 15. It's not too late. If you're listening to this out of sync, go listen and take the challenge. Because last week we got real about the standards. We talked about how often we view them in a very negative way and they feel like they have a very negative influence on us as individuals and, dare I say it, as a profession, and how it's totally our choice to reframe that. We talked about the power of impact and the purpose that we have as educators to have an impact on the lives of hundreds of thousands of kids during our careers. And we talked about how the standards helped us to celebrate that and to identify areas where we could be even better at creating a stronger impact. Well, this week in episode 16, I want us to delve into that a little bit more practically. So in episode 16, and the show notes for this, as always, are over on edufolios.org/016. This week, the focus is providing you with a step-by-step guide to create powerful evidence of your impact. We talked last week about that impact, and I talked about asking you to connect it with the focus areas, and we also talked about how it isn't really all that important whether or not you're jumping through hoops or filling in paperwork. But this week I know that you want to know how you're going to measure that, how on earth you're going to show that impact in a teacher portfolio. So we're going to focus on that. And the step-by-step guide has, 4 steps in it. It's really simple. It involves having a control, identifying a problem, hypothesizing over a solution, putting that solution into place and measuring what you see. It's as simple as that. And when I'm talking about impact here, this could be impact in one lesson or on one group of students. It could be impact on a colleague or a group of colleagues, whether that be a support teacher, a pre-service teacher, someone you line manage, or it could be an impact at a whole site level. And if you listen to last week's podcast, you'll know that I'm very much moving through graduate, proficient, highly accomplished, and lead there with that scope of impact. Because our jobs are amazing. I love our jobs as educators. And the beautiful power of this is our impact does not have to stop with the students in our classroom. It goes across the site and into our community. That's why teaching is friggin' awesome. Okay, so here are the steps to make that friggin' awesome impact that you have look beautiful in your portfolio as a piece of evidence. Now, if you're tuned into this and you are a graduate teacher at university, then really tune in a bit more, because this is going to be very much like what you are all required nationally to do for your graduate teacher performance assessment. You might listen and go, oh, yes, that makes sense. So tune in if you're on that stage. Tune in if you're in Victoria and you're having to do your inquiry project, because this is going to give you a formula for that too. This is a great step-by-step guide. Now, if you head to edufolios.org/016, you're going to be able to download a guide to this process, a step-by-step workbook that you can use to help you record the answers to these questions I'm going to ask you. So if you have the opportunity now, it would be a great time to head over and grab that freebie and work through it with me. So step 1 of this 4-step process is to measure and define now. Measure and define now. As educators, we have to use our teacher spidey senses. We have to use the data that is in front of us to identify an opportunity to help a student or a colleague grow. So we need to measure what we believe the problem or the growth opportunity to be, how we know that, and what we're going to do about it. That is the first step. Could be one evidence post. And the formula involves an X, a Y, and a Z. And we're going to go through that. Because without knowing what and why you're doing this, what you're trying to change or grow and why you want to change it, how are you going to measure it? And how are you going to check to see if this is working? So we're going to start with where we're at now. So if the formula goes X, and X could be a student or a colleague or anyone, X needs or wants to grow Y, Y being the thing that we want to develop and improve, and I can help by doing Z. So what are you going to do to help make this happen, to produce this impact? So when you're writing this paragraph, you are basically defining the beginning of this process. Like in a science experiment, this is almost like your control. So the first thing you want to do in this paragraph as you expand this sentence of X needs or would like to grow Y, and I can help by doing Z, you might want to start by explaining who X is. So X could be a student, for example, and you're going to share the important and influencing factors about X that you can record. So for example, if X as a student has a particular strength that you're trying to encourage or has a gap that you're trying to fill, you're going to share that with us. Is there a particular story behind who they are and how they've got to the point they're at now that has relevance? Now, it's really important at this point to state that it's really, really, really important that you don't actually tell me who X is. So de-identify what you're doing, whether that be in photographs or when you're using their names. Redact names, make sure that this is anonymous. Don't give me information about who X actually is. Let's make sure we're meeting standard 4.5 and responding ethically to this situation. But you're going to tell me something about X and you're going to let me know any background information that will help me contextualize what you're doing. Now we're going to do Y. So Y was what they wanted to grow. So X is this person and this gap seems to be here. And Y is what we want to do, what the impact is going to be. So in defining Y, you might want to look at some data that you can share that will show where they're at now. And by data, I don't necessarily mean a spreadsheet or a graph. I mean a sample of their work, perhaps, that you've annotated, an email from a colleague asking you to be involved in a conversation. Data can be any artifact at all that backs up the problem that you identified in X. Okay, so now we've defined who X is. We have proof that there is this gap and an opportunity for growth. And the next part is Z. What are you going to do? So Z is where you do a leap of faith. You say, well, this is what I've identified. In my experience, I would suggest that we do Z. We're going to run a program and we're going to pull these kids out and we're going to run a separate program to accelerate their learning in this particular space, for example. And you're going to explain what you're going to do and maybe give me an idea about why you made that choice. So that's X, Y, and Z. X is the person. X needs or would like to grow Y, and you're going to bring your artifacts in to support that. And this is what I'm going to do, Z, okay, to help them do that. So you've outlined the beginning of the story, what the problem is and what you're hoping to achieve. That is step 1, and that could be the end of the first evidence post. Step 2 is to just record your moves and the results they produced. So what do you do? So go teach your lesson, go run the PD, whatever it is that you're trying to have an impact, go do it. All right, but don't stop just telling me what and how. Don't stop at just what and how. Don't just write, I did this lesson plan and this is how I did it. Because I need to know whether or not the person that you're working with is making progress. So you need to check in regularly, just as you would in your lesson. All right, so look, get them to write again and again and again if If the problem is, for example, that your student needs to use more variety in their sentences, in the first post, you might have presented a piece of student work where you can see they're just using really basic sentence structures. It's got no variety, bleh. And you're going to do an intervention program on sentence structures where you teach them about fronted clauses and all the stylistic literary things that they can do to improve their writing. So you might then want to include at this point a copy of your lesson plans that you're going to use or the resources that you're going to use, and then a copy of a sample of their work. 1 lesson in, 2 lessons in, 3 lessons in. Are we seeing an improvement? We would hope so, right? As my son would say, show me, don't tell me, all right? Show me the work that colleague or that student is producing after your intervention and explain to me how that shows an improvement. That's your impact. That's the data. That's the evidence of impact. And hopefully the impact is growth. All right. So that data could be a score on an exam. It could be written work. It could be a letter or an email from a colleague. It could be attendance figures. It depends on what the target was that you set in the other thing. Just make sure that when you include it, whatever you pick, you explain how it shows that candidate X has moved forward in some way. That's the second evidence post. And again, you'll have different artifacts, and we're showing that progress. Step 3 is to basically keep doing that, to collect evidence over time. So if this is a 7 or 10 week unit, keep taking samples. Grab that data. Can you show their sentence constructions growing in sophistication? Can you identify when that started to happen and connect that with an action or something that you did? Have you asked them what's worked? Did you record that in their work? Did they leave you a message too? And I love a bit of teacher-student conversation in the margin of a book. That's fantastic, very handy, and a beautiful thing. It shows your relationship with that student too. Keep doing that cycle of collecting evidence and measuring it. And as you're doing this proactively, it's going to influence the decisions you make about the next activity you run with these students. So you can document that, particularly if you're doing this at Proficient. That's going to be beautiful evidence of you applying what you learned at uni in the context of your classroom and in the context of this particular student. The final step is step 4, and that's when we reflect on how what you just did helped you to grow. Remember, in every career stage, whether that be graduate or lead, you are an important piece of the puzzle. And if you don't stop to connect back to you and the impact this has had on you, then you won't get to celebrate. All right, so look, this is where we do what I talked about last week, where we connect those focus areas in and we start to explore what that meant for you, where you talk about the impact that you had on someone, how you helped them to make great progress. You stop, you breathe, you grab the chocolate, the coffee, the champagne, whatever you need, and you go through this collection that you've created and you take a moment to see how you grew and how you adapted your teaching to maximize this impact. What did you learn through this process? Were there any surprises? And what would you like to learn next? Set yourself a target, my friends, and start all over again. And if you keep going through this process, if you pick one thing you want to have an impact on every term and write 3 or 4 posts, you will be a richer, much happier teacher in terms of your well-being, because you will have connected with the power of what you do, and you will also have grown so much in doing so. So go through this process for me and tell me what happens. Let me know what the impact is for you. Make sure you come back and ask any questions that you have. Remember, the hashtag we use is Reflectionist, and you can find me on Instagram and on Facebook. I'll be going live as I do every Thursday, so pop in and ask questions. And then next week, we're going to keep talking about this theme of impact, and we're actually going to talk about annotating your evidence. So far, we've gone from the big picture of impact down to how we can use a step-by-step process to identify the impact. And I've talked about some of those artifacts. Next week, we're going to dive into what you can do with those artifacts, what an annotation of an artifact looks like, and what makes a quality artifact. That's a word you like to tell me all the time. What on earth is a quality artifact? Well, we're going to talk about that next week on the Reflective Teacher podcast. And in the meantime, have a wonderful week, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.